Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 36th Sustainable Agriculture Conference from the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. You have joined the session Small Scale Grain Production, Processing, and Equipment with Nazirahk Amen of Purple Mountain Organics. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we will address them at the end. And now I'm going to hand it over to Nazirahk.
Peace, everyone. I'm Nazirahk Amen with Purple Mountain Organics. It'd be really great to see you all in person. So we're going to talk about small scale grain production, processing, and equipment. That's me in front of a sorghum crop that we grew this year, or that was actually grown on Next Step Produce this year. This sorghum was actually used not for grain, but for syrup. But it's an amazing crop. You can see it was 12, 15 feet high. So why grow grains? Well, I guess the first reason I could think of for me, not necessarily as a farmer farming for sale, but as a sustenance farmer, is because we eat them. I have been on a plant-based diet for probably, well, it's over 30 years now. And basically we've for about, well, for 30 years, we've tried to grow as much of our food as we possibly could. And so for many years, we grew a lot of root vegetables. And it was about 10 years ago that we got into small scale grain production. So, but in general, our commodity crop system through which many of our grains are grown is completely unsustainable. And, we contribute to, we've scaled up beyond the scale of a lot of small farmers. And I think, from an environmental perspective, from a sustainability perspective, scaling down to small scale farms, local production, this is really the time for that. So these grains that are grown on the bigger scale are definitely part of, the bases of corn and soy, processed foods, help shift everything towards local food systems. From a small farm perspective, they help, growing grains help diversify your farm, helps with carbon sequestration, helps to increase soil health. And for us, it's created a niche market. Our niche is at the farmers markets up here in DC. We're in about 4 different farmers markets, and we specialize in grains and dry beans. So the biggest obstacle to small scale grain production right now is really the lack of infrastructure in harvesting and processing equipment. America probably divested away from small scale grain harvesting way back in the 40s and 50s. And so most of the equipment that has been around has been mainly for research equipment at universities. And then a lot of us have been working with old equipment that's still around from the 50s, just patching it up over and over, and keeping that going. So we'll see some of the stuff that we've been doing to make up for this. And one of the big advantages, of course, is the uneven advantage that large scale growers have in terms of commodity crop subsidies. Well, I should say with that there is a niche in terms of local sustainability. We definitely get paid the price that we like from the people at the farmers market. And basically, I work with another farmer, and he has basically calculated all the pricing based on the time and the labor and the amortization of his equipment. And so these are it's worth it is what I'm trying to say. So to get started, I would say we want to start small. The easiest grains to grow on a small scale on the farm is corn and, of course, beans. A lot of times beans are used for to pick fresh. We simply let a lot of the beans go all the way to dry beans. We can talk about some of the challenges with that. Um, I would say that you want to, in the beginning, grow only the amount that you have the capacity to process. And another easy way to grow is take a wheat crop that you might grow as a cover crop for the winter and, harvest that. So this is actually a bean field that we had. I think these, which you can see that they're basically drying down. I think this is a Bartoli. You can see a little bit later on what a field like that looks like. So that's a little bit before we harvest them. So in here, we waited until the beans have dried on the plant, and then all of the green is off of the plant. And then once the plants actually dry up, then you can run it through the combine. So with the beans, we're looking for beans that will stand upright. And so they're easy to harvest with a combine. So actually, in this case, these were some Tiger Eye bean, and Tiger Eye is one of our best sellers at the market. So you can see the plants are green and the pods are brown. And so last year we planted Tiger's Eye early, thinking that we were like getting ahead. Early meaning for us up here in Maryland on around June 1st. They came up and the plants matured, the beans matured right before the plants dried down. A tropical storm came through, and then it rained for about 4 days, and most of our beans sprouted in the pods. And so instead of taking the risk this year, there was a storm coming through, and we decided that we would pick about half of the field. And this is what you see here. So we took them into a hoop house and we're drying them down. So we do local dry beans. We do a number of varieties. The main ones we do, like the easiest to grow on the dried beans, are black beans and pinto beans. They're easy to harvest, but the ones that really go at the market are the really beautiful beans, like the ones you see, the Rosa de Lucas, the Tiger's Eye, the early Warwicks, Whipple. We have a number of beans, but these are the ones that people really come for, and despite the price, I think people love to just look at these beans. And for me as a farmer, every day I pick a pocket full of beans as the plants are maturing, and they're mesmerizing. So so you can hand pick both bush and pole beans. We mostly do dry beans. Bush beans, because that's what you can combine. And basically a lot of the breeders have selected for upright stature, and so they're making them easy to combine. So we'll go through some equipment. I'll be a little bit scattered, but try to keep everything on track. Slides. So to get started with corn and beans, we have a bean planter. We grow our corn on a two-row system and the beans. Two is about, I think it's 28 inches apart for us. That's what we have set up the planter for, and the cultivation equipment that is on that same setting. And so with the corn that we like to grow is popcorn, but usually about 6 apart, I think. And then the beans go as close as possibly with the beans. We're about 1.5, 2-inch spacing for dry bean. This field, this was a field of pinto beans that were coming up. And you can see here our use Japanese equipment. And so here that you see is a sprayer tractor. In this case, I am running a system. And so the idea with particular is that, you want to get in 2 or 3 cultivations before the beans fill in. So that way, when they fill in, you don't have to do much hand weeding. So this year was great for us with the beans. I don't think we did one hand weeding at the end when we went in to harvest. We had to pull some amaranth out, but none of the other weeds made it through, and so we had a really good crop. You don't need to be so fancy. You can do the same with basket weeders, with traditional weeding equipment. Um, the we use precision cultivators. In this case, the Torrentine weeders, but you can also use finger weeders. And what the Torrentine weeders do and the finger weeders do is they allow for in-row weeding, which means that you're actually getting in between the rows with your larger cultivation pieces, but the Torrentine weeders and the finger weeders actually weed in the row between the plants. So that's a really great feature, which eliminates a couple hand weedings. You can see Brother Larry here, who is this is a Japanese walking wheel hoe. It's the same system of tine weeders as I showed you before, just on a wheel hoe. This weeding system is called a Q hoe, like the letter Q and then hoe. So here he is, he's navigating a popcorn crop. And you can see how small the plants are. And so that's a Q hoe system. This is kind of what they look like. On the left in the back there, that's a 2-row bean weeder and corn weeder. So you can see on the front of that cultivation system, there's a couple. It looks kind of like finger weeders on the front, but really they're crust breakers. So they break the ground open, and then you can see a couple like goosefoot weeders in there that come down and sort of break the crust of the ground. And then you can see 2 sets of the Torrentine weeders. And there's like on the Torrentine weeders, you can add different ones for different stages of the plant growth. So that first set kind of stays on there. That's a general one. And then the more mature the plants get, the more aggressive you can get with the in-grow weeding. If you look down at the bottom there, you can see sort of how the V shape on those Torrentine weeders. And then that weeding system on the left, we use we've used that for einkorn and wheat. It's actually a little bit wide for what we do. The plant spacing on that is about 11 inches. That's a little big. So this is what the bean crops look like a little bit later. This is the same field. These are tiger's eye on the right there, and on the left, we have Arikara. Most of our fields of beans are anywhere from a quarter acre up to an acre. And we try to do 2 to 3 acres of beans every year. So you want to get that canopy cover that will eliminate the weeds. And you want to work with stuff that really tries to stand upright so that you can harvest them easily. So moving to the corn, I'm talking about beans and corn kind of together because they both go with that planting system. The corn you see there is kind of like, oh, I know what happened here. We also planted on this spectrum a purple popcorn. I can't Dakota Black. So Dakota Black popcorn, and we planted all three of these corn. So you have a dent corn uh, on the left, and then you have popcorn in the middle there. And so you can see how the popcorn that we grew. I mean, the dent corn that we grow is a called Rebellion. And Rebellion is a variety of dent corn that has the gene for popcorn bred into it, and this gene um, doesn't allow this corn to cross over with GMO corn. So that kind of, that's one of the things that customers, when you're working at the market, they want to know if this corn is GMO or if it has the possibility of being GMO. And here, so we can sort of guarantee people that it's not GMO. So that's the Rebellion on the left. And then you can see how, since we planted it all together, what I was trying to show in this picture is how it all kind of interbred. The smaller one is a Japanese hulless popcorn. And so the popcorn does really well at the market, especially the hulless popcorn. It doesn't have a hull, which means it doesn't get stuck in teeth as much. So that people really like it, and they come back for that one a lot. You can see what that looks like close up. That's the Japanese hulless popcorn. This is my buddy Heinz Tomet of Next Step Produce. He's direct combining some popcorn here. And so when you work with the corn, what we do with our corn, we grow we've grown up to a half acre of each of these, but we basically hand pick, and then we run everything through a huller. So we only grow enough to hand pick and grow it through a huller, because we don't have a sheller, because we do not have a combine that will direct combine the corn. So that's, a quarter acre, eighth of an acre field is still a lot of corn if you're to start off with. So I'll kind of run through this for the sake of time. So we want to move to small grains. So small grains, it's a different format that we use, because we use different drills and than we would use for the corn and beans. The other grain that goes with the corn and beans would be millet and sorghum. So those we also put on that 28-inch those 28-inch rows, and we use the same planter that we use the as the corn and bean. But small grains are wheat. So we do a soft and a hard wheat. There's winter wheat, there's spring wheat. We'll talk about wheat. We also do barley in the spring. We do rye, which is winter. Oats are for the spring. That's a hulless variety that we do. Rice is the grain that we started with, and that's, of course, a summer grain. Sorghum and millet are summer. Buckwheat is summer. The ones that aren't up here, recently we just did a field of lentils, and we interplanted the lentils with wheat. The wheat hopefully will add some structure, and then we can harvest some lentils and separate them out in the seed cleaning equipment. The other grain that we do that we can interplant with wheat is called camelina. People use that one for oil. So we can grow camelina in the wheat field, and we just harvest it all together. The other grain that we do is mustard in the spring. So the rice. So we started, actually, I got started off with grain production. And when I went to a CFSA conference, I don't know, back in maybe 2011 or 2012, a young man and his wife were doing a SARE grant, and gave their presentation, and in one of the trials, in his second year, the rice that they did, the rains didn't come, so he couldn't do a flooded paddy. And he mentioned how he grew rice on drip tape. So I figured, we could grow rice on drip tape. So that's what we've been doing. So normally this is called dryland rice or upland rice, in that we're not using a flooded paddy. We're just using standard sort of small farm equipment, like a bed layer and water wheel, and to do our rice. You can do a paddy, things like that. But the philosophy under which we grow our rice is under the system of rice intensification, which is sort of a way that we're growing rice, and we're doing using a mulch layer. We do about 11 inches in between the rows, 8 inches between the plant here, and we're transplanting. So we're doing one rice plant, and we're depending on the rice to tiller. So you can see tillering means that you can see that there is like quite a few shoots on each of these. So good tillering can be up to 25, 30 shoots on each plant. And so instead of planting at a high density, you're depending on each of the plants to have a high tillering rate. And with that high tillering rate, you get healthier plants, which create more rice. And in that way, you can sort of equalize the production level between paddy production and dryland production. And we also sort of rely more heavily on biological farming. In a paddy situation, you have a reaction that happens when you flood a field called the reduction reaction, which simply means that you take oxygen out of a system. And when you take the oxygen out of the system, you free up the potassium and the phosphorus, which is available directly to the plant. That does not happen when you do aerobic production. So then we depend on having really good biology in the soil to make that happen for us, for those plants to get the phosphorus and the potassium that they need. So this is us, actually a sort of a joint venture between us and Next Step Produce. So that's a 2-row planter. There's 2 people laying down there, and then the two folk in the back are doing quality control. It is possible to direct seed rice. Here is some experimentation that we did with a 4-row system. And just the general planting, we probably, off of this little patch here that you're looking at, just the part that's direct seeded, I think we harvested about, that was actually this year. And so we did not, we overhead irrigated it once. And other than that, it was really on the weather. So we do have clay soil. And with clay soil, it's definitely impossible to grow rice without irrigation. So there is some hand weeding involved in this method, but it's possible to grow rice. And so on this rice, the 4-row system, we use the same QHO cultivation system, but then we had to come back and hand weed. So our goal is to try to grow rice without using plastic. Some rice coming out, it's heading. Beautiful rice. That's a black rice. And so to harvest the rice, we use a Japanese rice combine. This is another piece of equipment that was imported. So the Japanese, they have localized small scale rice production systems and just grain production systems in general, where they're doing everything. I think their largest plots are like 10 acres. Most people grow on less than an acre. They usually share equipment. So the used Japanese importing this, the rules are that if it has a diesel engine, it has to be 20 years or older. And for the most part, in Japan, a lot of the equipment, they don't put many hours. So the equipment that we've been able to import that has been 20 years old, one of these pieces of equipment we have was for a dealer. People rented it every year, and I think it came in at 20 years old with less than 700 hours on it. So technically, that's still a pretty unused piece of equipment. And we're able to get the parts. So the other special piece of equipment you need for rice is a huller. So this is a rice huller. That's also a mill. So when we move over to small grains, we want to you need a way to get them in the ground. So actually, we were working on this machine, but you can see this is our grain drill. This one is on a rotary harrow. So the rotary harrow does not invert the soil. And the other thing about the rotary harrow is that it doesn't invert the soil, and you can run it when there's high residue. So it's not no-till, but we do have a no-till drill that we can use. There's advantages to both. That's what it looks like on the tractor without the tubes there, though. The other piece of equipment so you need a grain drill of some sort. And then, basically one of the pieces of equipment that we use with small grains is a tine weeder. And mostly in the fall, usually in the fall, you want to try to like get your everything seeded, hopefully before October 15th. You get a good germination, and then basically your wheat comes up, and then the broad weeds. And so the goal is to have clean fields before you go into the winter. And so you do 1 or 2 cultivations before the winter kicks in, and you're getting out all those thread stage broadweed leaves that might overwinter and sprout up with your wheat in the spring. And so that will give your grain a chance to get a head start. And so you can see, this is a boom sprayer. We'll come back to that. But basically, that's been a beautiful piece of equipment. This was a field that we planted, and this was a sort of an opportunity, but this sometimes is how organic fields look with grain. So this was the field that was in pasture that a farmer let us use. It had been sitting fallow for years. And so it had a lot of clover in it. It had a lot of, some of those patches you see there are thistle. And so basically, we turned the ground over and just went for it. So that's one way to do it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but we were looking for some ground, and this is what came up. And so this was this was a 6-acre field of 2 different varieties of winter wheat. So we were able to combine most of it. We couldn't get through those heavier sections. So with the wheat, you can do a hard wheat. Hard wheats are mostly for breads. And so there's hard red and hard white. Most times we're doing like a hard red. We'll talk about some varieties. The soft wheats they're good for pastries, for cookies, for cakes, for quick breads, anything that's not yeasted. And then with wheat, you have winter wheat versus the spring wheat. Ideally, winter wheat is the best to go with. It's not always like this year in Maryland. We've had rains that are late, so a lot of the big planters can't get in a winter wheat. Last year, a lot of farmers didn't get in a winter wheat, so then you came in with a spring wheat. In the spring, there tends to be a lot more weed pressure than with winter wheat. So that's something to think about. So on the varieties of wheat, So this was me harvesting that field that you saw. So that's a different combine than the one that we use for the rice. That's another used Japanese piece of equipment. So it has a 5-foot header on it, and it actually works really well. This one can do both small grains and the beans, and it's beautiful for the beans because it has cups in it, which doesn't grind up the beans. So we can harvest some fairly large beans with little damage to it. But in this case, so with the wheat varieties, you have a sort of a we've grown Expedition. Turkey Red is an heirloom variety. Redeemer, Red Fife. So these are the ones that the bakers are looking for. Is your hard red winter wheat. There's a winter hard white. Um, so the reds tend to have the red color. The whites tend to have more of a white color to it. When you open up the berries. So the hard white winter wheat that we grow is Appalachian. Um, Last year we grew a soft red winter wheat called Erisman from Albert Lee Seeds. Erisman was bred specifically for organic growers. One note about soft red wheat. So the whole idea of soft wheat is for the pastries and for the cakes. And so at the market, a lot of times folk would rather have soft whites because somehow people like eating white stuff more when it comes to pastry. They don't want to bite into a donut and it's red on the inside or something. So the soft white wheats for winter, the most popular one that we grow is Frederick, or the one that we've grown the most is Frederick. Uh, Alice is another one that our farm buddy Heinz, he grows at Next Step. Another one is called Harris. And then the other wheat that we've grown a lot, or for the last couple of years, is called Bowles. Bowles is a spring wheat with a pretty high protein content to it. And so another one that the bakers really like. So then we go to oats, and the oats that we grow are hull-less oats, and which means that they don't have a hull on them. Normally, oats like Quaker oats or any of the oats that are on the market, as far as like rolled oats, the process that they go through is to steam them. They, I think, dehull them, steam them, or steam them to dehull them, and then they roll the oats. And so we grow a variety called Streaker. Streaker basically is hullless. Hullless doesn't mean it doesn't have any hulls, but it's about a 99% hullless. So we still have to run it through some equipment, which I'll show you today, to get all of the hulls out. But so all we have to do is roll them raw. So we clean them, get it to the standard. We go through this process that I'll show you, and then we basically roll them raw. It is definitely one of the best crops at the market. We sell oats year round. They are definitely a superfood. This is one of the crops that if you get into grains as a small farmer, it's definitely worth it. That's what they look like in the milky stage. So rye, the two varieties that we work with are Hazlitt or Hazlitt and Abruzzi. And the Abruzzi can be rolled. Some of the rye varieties can get very tall, which is something that you want to think about if you have to combine it, especially if you know you have any kind of lodging, or if the grain falls over, which is what lodging is. So if you have a lot of lodging, we try to grow the shorter varieties, and even still, short varieties of rye are still taller than most other grains. Barley, this is an Ethiopian blue barley here on the right. Barley is a spring planted grain. Barley does not like wet soils. So I would tell you not to grow in any type of wet soil. Is great for soups and salad. It is the food of the gladiators, or was, I should say, and it is the fastest spring grain from seeding to harvest. So it's the first one that comes out of the field at the end of the spring. Sorghum and millet. So sorghum is a grain, and millet, these are African grains, um, and they're summer grains. So they're gluten free. So there's a whole market of gluten free. And for us, of course, you still have to be careful with people with Crohn's disease and the idea of gluten free, because even though we grow sorghum and millet, all of the, we're small scale, so all of the equipment that we process it on is the same as what we do our wheat on. So some people are really hyperallergenic, so you want to be careful. So with that, but so anyway, the sorghum and millet are a gluten free. We experiment with different recipes that we give out at the market so people can work with them. um, they tend to be drought resistant, and they're some of the easiest grains to grow. The birds love them, uh, but they are some of definitely the easiest grains to grow. So you can see grain sorghum is a lot shorter than the syrup sorghum. All the grain sorghum we grow is, I want to say, around 5 feet tall versus what you saw there, which was more like 12 to 15 feet tall. Um, Another crop that we grow is mustard. So this is a mustard field in bloom. A few years ago, we had the Woodbury Restaurant, which is a restaurant up in Baltimore that sources all of their goods locally. They asked another farmer to grow a field of mustard, um, and so we got into growing mustard. So it's an easy one to do. It's, hold on here. Somehow I skipped over. That's actually harvesting some millet. Buckwheat. So the buckwheat is, of course, a famous cover crop or quick cover that a lot of organic farmers use kind of as an in-between crop in the summertime. You can grow buckwheat to harvest for grain. It's another gluten-free, hypoallergenic grain that a lot of people love. Buckwheat flour has a really nutty flavor. It's good for waffles and pancakes and muffins. And unlike the sorghum and millet, you do not have to mix buckwheat with other flours to get the consistency that you need. So people love buckwheat flour. It's one of our good sellers at the market. We do buckwheat groats, which is to basically dehull the buckwheat and just sell it whole. We have a buckwheat huller that we work with, and but buckwheat flour is one of our nice ones. So I guess when you grow buckwheat's kind of hard to harvest. You can see in here there's a lot of green. It's a plant that even when it goes to seed, it doesn't dry down. So you kind of have to have the ability to combine it when it's still sort of partly green. So, all right, so drying methods. So to start small scale, what we used is a drying box. This was probably a week or two ago. Those are some pinto beans that we harvested in a batch. So sometimes, with our harvesting capability, we'll just do a row or two of beans because that's all that we can dry at a time. So that's one of the things you want to think about when you grow is like how much with the beans, they need to be down to below 5% for storage, but most of the grains need to be below 14% for all your small grains. So this box has a heater. You can see that small heater there on the bottom. and there's a screen sitting right above the heater. And so that heater is just blowing hot air through the box. So mostly, we're in the mid-Atlantic, which is basically a temperate rainforest where we are. So in order to get those grains or your beans down to the right moisture, you'll need to add some heat. In a lot of places, they have dry air outside. But with the air that we have, the sort of ambient humidity is too high. So you need to add heat. So you can either do this by having something like a greenhouse or a hoop house, which has plastic. But even when you do that, you want to add air. So you want to make sure the air is moving and you have the heat so that you don't get anything sitting, and then you start to get mold. And so I guess, well, we'll talk about harvesting a little bit. Um, so that's a box that we use. These are some trays that we use. I'll go back here. So this is a bin that we sort of transfer out of the combine. And then from there, we go into like a grain cleaner, but these are the boxes that we use when we come out of the field. They basically have an outlet on the bottom, so we can pick this up over the seed cleaner. This is us, the Bertolli beans. So they're being dried down just on some tables with a fan on it with the ambient, the heat. Same. This is another grain that we were drying down. This is barley that we were drying down, but you can see this is just a hydroponic table that we were using. So when you spread grain on a table like this, you want to make sure that you're not going over, maybe an inch, 2 inches. And even you want to be able to stir your grain around as much as possible. And harvest, the important thing is to harvest when it's dry enough. It's not always possible because we live in a temperate environment. So when you get a lot of rain, but when you harvest, you really want to harvest. The optimal time to harvest is midday. So anywhere like after the dew is gone and before the dew comes back in the evening. So ideally somewhere between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. That's when there's the least moisture in the atmosphere. You want to try to not harvest around any rains. And so the other thing I didn't mention is when you grow grains, one of your best friends is a moisture meter. So you get the moisture out in the field. Hopefully you've let your grain dry down somewhere between, like this year when we harvested wheat, it was so dry here that the wheat was 12% in the field when we harvested. I've not seen that before. Mostly we harvest somewhere between 18 and 20%. And then we have to dry it down using our different drying methods. So these are smaller scale drying methods. I'll show you a larger scale of what we use later, a box. So these are different dryers. So this was us trying to grow lima beans. This was sort of a failed venture here. I don't recommend lima beans because the plants don't dry down in the field. But this was us drying down some lima beans. This is actually a Japanese recirculating dryer, which you can use for any of the small grains. The beauty of this is, well, it's run on kerosene, but it's kind of blowing hot air through the center of the grain, not in the same chamber. Like the air doesn't interact with the grain. It just heats up the unit, and then it blows the air out. And then in this case, the one that we have also has sort of infrared drying so that the grain dries down evenly. And you can get the one that we have does about, I think the highest capacity is about 2,000 pounds of grain. But they go up to 10 or 20,000 pounds. So this is sort of a panoramic view of the grain processing center. This is Next Step Produce, down in Southern Maryland, which is Heinz Thomas is sort of a grain guru. He's definitely been someone that we use as a resource. So we kind of have a collaboration going where I harvest grains and beans for him, and he lets us use a lot of his processing equipment. So we continually sort of help each other out, and we've been working with different entities around to basically try to establish sort of a local grain processing hub, which is really what's needed. Heinz is a vegetable farmer who sort of, as he aged, realized that he couldn't be on his knees for much longer, so he got into the grain movement and he invested in this. So if you look over in the right hand corner here, that wooden structure is his larger drying box. And what else? We're going to go through this. So this was us setting up for oats here. And so from left to right, there's the boxes on top. You see an indent cleaner, and then you see two augers so indent cleaner, then polisher, and then there's an auger bringing it up to the seed cleaner, the air seed cleaner, and from the air seed cleaner, it's going into a gravity table, and then from the gravity table, it's going down to actually a laser color sorter, and from the laser color sorter, we're bagging it. So this is us basically doing our last run on our oats. So the oats before were combined out of the field and run through the seed cleaner and put in a dryer, and so and then stored in a super bag. All right, so I'm going to show you that process. All right, let me go to the beginning. All right, so you can see the box at the top, which is full of the grain, and that's going into an indent cleaner. And so this indent cleaner was actually taking out the, you see it's spinning. So right here, there's indents. You can see the grain falling off of this barrel that's kind of rolling, and so that is separating out the hulled from the unhulled. The hulled drop to the unhulled are bigger. They drop to the bottom and fall out the side, which is what you'll see. But all it is sort of a barrel that's rolling around, and so this is all the unhulled. So it says tailings, but if you look down there, you'll see it's unhulled oats. That's kind of what they look like there. So that is the 1% that's still left in there. And then over here, the other thing you want to see about oats is how dusty oats are. Oats, it's interesting. I'm a naturopathic doctor and an acupuncturist, and so, oats is used as a nervine to calm the nerves. It's also used, for skin stuff to stop itching. But this dust that you see here on this machine, oats is the itchiest grain that we know. It will set you on fire. Whether you're harvesting or working with it, that dust gets into everything. So it's the dustiest grain that we know. So that's actually, this machine here is called a polisher. So it's dumping it in the polisher, and from the polisher, you can sort of see the difference from what we started with. And here I'm walking over to the, this is the air seed cleaner. So air screen cleaner. So there's air blowing through, which gets out all the light stuff, which is what you see here. Those two chutes, that's being blown out by the air. So that's the light stuff. And oh, okay, this is that's also being blown out by the air. No, this is not. This is actually what's coming off of the scalpel on the top. So when you have an air screen cleaner, usually you have a couple different screens, but the top screen will allow the grain that you want to fall through. And it has what's called a scalpel. So in this case, you're scalping off all the larger stuff, which you can see here in there. There's little sort of clay pebbles, maybe. So when you harvest grain and it is lodged, you can get rocks in the grain. So that may be some pebbles, that may be clay balls, but it's being scalped out on the top. And so you can see that machine is just shaking. And so we'll move on from there. We can go back to air screen cleaners, and I'll go around. And so this is a gravity table. So that gravity table is basically shaking the grain, and all the heavier stuff sort of goes up to the top, the more dense, and the lighter stuff falls to the bottom. And so the higher quality stuff will be more dense, and then you can get out all of the lighter stuff. And also on this machine, all of the heavier stuff, like this is where all the, you see sort of a little plate going across on the left hand side up there. All of the rocks collect up there. So this is where we get rid of all the rocks. So that's all the stuff being recycled. That stuff is being discarded. And this is the good stuff that's going over to the color laser sorter. So I'm walking around here. So a color laser sorter sort of has an eye on it. I don't know if I show it in this case. Yes, I do. So I walk up there, and what you'll see is it's using air. So that's these are grain falling down a chute, and as the grain falls down the chute, there's an eye on here that's being programmed, and so we're sorting based on color. So and you'll see this is separating all the good stuff from the bad stuff. But so as the grain is falling down the chute, this thing uses jet streams of air to just shoot out all the bad stuff that it identifies. And that's the final step in our sort of getting people oats ready. And so let's see. This will show you what the bad stuff is. So you can see the black on there. So this is all the oats that might have been dense, but you can see that it still has some well, this is how the final step here. So black stuff, and then this is the good stuff. So what we're doing here is bagging. Let's see what else happens here. All right. So yeah, we'll bag the final, and then we basically, with all of our grains, we will do the final processing for market. So we roll to order or roll to for the market. All right. So that's basically, so when we go to market, we mostly we mill everything and roll everything for that week. So whether it be the rice, we hull the rice before market, we roll the oats before market. So basically, grain has about we can talk about storage life. The way that we store our grain is in a refrigerator. Grains cannot be stored with your vegetables. Grains want um, a temperature around 50 degrees with low humidity, whereas vegetables, you need a lower temperature and a higher humidity. So I don't even think you can legally store grains and vegetables in the same coolers. So we use a separate cooler with around 50 degrees and low humidity. And so we store it like that. And so you can save most of the nutrition in the grain that way, versus storing it out in room temperature. But once you process a grain, whether you hull it or in any way that you process, once you take the hull off of rice, for instance, the nutritional value of rice goes down, they say about 50% within 3 months after you hull it. So we try to get rice, and the flavor is so much better when you can hull it fresh. Let's see. I have a few more clips on here. We're at 6:01. We have just a few more minutes. Okay. Let's see what this is. This is going to some corn. So this is us using an old John Deere corn sheller for some popcorn. So this is popcorn that we hand picked, and then we're shelling it. And so that's what it's like. These are beans. So last year we harvested some beans, and one of the things about harvesting beans is the challenge of growing beans. Beans are mostly grown in dry climates. So our thing is creating a local system. So the challenge of growing dry beans in sort of a semi-wet climate is one thing that we found is that it's better. We learned last year, and it happened to two farmers that we know this year, that when they planted on that June 1st planting date, this year we had two fields of black beans for two separate farmers. They planted early June, and by the time it came for the plants to start to dry down, we had more rain. And so what they had was a beans that had a mature set of beans on the bottom, and then when that rain came, the beans started to grow again. And so it was hard. You couldn't run a combine through the field because you had dry stuff on the bottom and this green plant on the top. And so anyway, the challenge of beans, we found that it's better to do beans as a second crop behind wheat or oats. And usually, hopefully you can get a dry fall, and they dry down nicely in the field. But this is a set of beans that we could not dry down in time. So then we needed to polish it to get some of the green off. And so what we did was we used a mixer, and we added rice hulls to it and sand, and we were able to, no, we didn't, this was rice hulls and Brillo pads actually, and we were able to get these beans to shine up and be a lot more marketable. So just some of the stuff that we do to be innovative to let's see, what else do we have here? This is a little video. So that planter, that seeder here, this is what I use to seed that rice that you saw. I've planted einkorn with that one last year. So what you see in this video is this was actually the first. So that's what the Torrentine weeders look like in action. So you can see it's got some things that are breaking up the soil, and then you got the Torrentine weeders. This is for young plants. And so when you go through later, there'll be 2 sets of those Torrentine weeders that get really close up in on the plant. You can see there. Let's see. This may have the 2 sets on it. This was actually, I don't know what that plant is, but we use the same setup for the einkorn that we did last year. And what we noticed when we did that with the einkorn was we got a great weed-free field, but the einkorn, because it was so far apart, it lodged easily, which means it fell over. Just more eye candy. This is us harvesting some rice. So this is a little rice combine. So you can see it's bringing the plant material up, and instead of bringing everything in, it's kind of laying the plants on the side. So the tops of the plants are going through this drum, and it's beating the rice off of the plant. These machines can also be used for your small grains, any kind of cereal grain that's standing up. You see the nice job it's doing with the lodging. So this thing picks plants up off the ground. And it just, there's no compare. We used to have an old Massey Ferguson 8 combine, and compared to like messing around with the concave and all the settings, this thing is just, it gets such a clean grain into the tank that you can go straight into the dryer. You don't need to go through a seed cleaner before you bring it through a dryer. Mostly because it's just beating the grain off of the head. It's not chopping up the plant material and then separating it after it chops it up. Let's see. This is just kind of bringing some stuff. All right. Any questions? So the moisture meter that we use is we have a couple moisture meters. I I would have to get the brand for you. It's not here, but if you if we use 2 different moisture meters. I'd have to tell you what they are after the session, though. I don't have it with me. Any other questions out there? The processing component depends on. This is sort of I guess what you saw here was relatively high tech. Heinz's farm is about he has an 80-acre farm. He probably grows grain on about 20 acres. And I can say that, let me say this. So we have Heinz, and so you're taking a grain. Most grains are grown for animal food, and then we're bringing it up to the point where it's people food. So the gravity table, I would say, is a must. The color sorter, which is a $65,000 piece of equipment, may be an accessory. It's nice, but it's not necessary. So there's some equipment. We have another grower near us, and basically they have basic equipment that they're using, like a basic seed cleaner. If you're selling grain for flour, you can get away with a lot more than you can get away with than if you're selling grain as grain. So when we're selling to bakers, they really want nice, clean grain. But if you're doing direct milling, basically you can run a seed cleaner, and there's a lot you can get away with when you run through your own mill. So we make sure on all of the batches that we do, we sort of test it to make sure that the grain is can't think of the disease, but we test it every year, the different batches, and then once we know, and usually the issue that comes up with wheat. It can come up with other grain, but mostly when you're dealing with moisture and years where there's a lot of rain. Um, so and so when you don't have those years, you can get away. You know, we know growers who basically their processing center is a lot cruder. They just harvest, run it through a seed cleaner. They use super bags. They don't use um, refrigeration in the way that we do, and they're direct milling to and doing direct sales at the farmers market. They can actually do it for less than we do. Um, and so I think the investment is based on your comfort level and the quality of product. I can say some of that equipment, like I mentioned, the color laser sorter, we just sold the color laser sorter straight from Japan uh, to Marsh Mill down in South Carolina, and we picked up one. I think that was around 30,000, which is still a pretty good investment to help him with rice that he does down there. But is that piece of machinery necessary? Probably not. They were simply trying to get a. They had what is it? The sesbania seed in the rice. So the sesbania seed is black. The rice is white. So they were trying to get this black grain out of their white rice, and so they use the color sorter for that. Um, so I Yeah, there what we need, the discussion needs to be around creating local food hubs, um, or local grain processing facilities. We work with a university. The university has definitely helped in getting some equipment. We've talked to different municipalities. They love what we do. So I think that there is a momentum in the direction of creating local grain hubs so that more small farmers can get into this. And if you're doing it on a home scale, you don't need all this equipment. Any more questions? Uh, yes, the mustard seed that we do it was yellow mustard that we grew, and the yellow mustard was used simply as they were making their own mustard sauce as a condiment. So we weren't using it for oil. I'm sure if you have an oil extractor. So the camelina that we do for oil. Um, Camelina, you simply spread out there with the wheat, and then you harvest it with your overwintering grain. You separate it out in the seed cleaning process. It's a lot smaller than wheat, so we've been able to do that successfully. So, but we're using that for oil. The mustard, I guess again, you can do it for oil, but we've done it mainly for restaurants that want to make their own mustard sauce or mustard Dijon.
We'll take one more question. I think we've from Amy Hayes before we wrap up. She says, if we got an earmark or a grant to reproduce the grain processing room, how much would it be?
Wait, what's that?
She says, if we got an earmark or a grant to reproduce the grain processing room, how much would it be?
Oh, on that grain processing room, I think Heinz has invested somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 there. But that includes the building. So I'm not quite sure. I would say if you got it from, if you got a grant and they were actually trying to do it, I would say the budget needs to be somewhere around $500,000 to create one that would be sort of a seamless one. There are actually companies now that sort of sell packages where a lot of this stuff can be done start to finish in sort of a package. We do so many different grains, like we'll go from mustard seed all the way up to the larger beans. So I think when you add a lot of variety, you have to sort of, make adjustments for adding that variety. So, and that's our niche, someone said, you should just do black beans and pinto beans and that's it for the beans and maybe one or two varieties of wheat. But like with our rice, we grow, so we do an acre of rice and more like an acre and a quarter, acre and a half of rice. But on that, we're doing 6 or 7 different varieties. And so people love the variety that, they can come to the market. And so off of that acre and a half, we'll have anywhere from 500 to 1,000 pounds of each of those varieties of rice for the year. And then we just hull it throughout the year. And so actually, so we'll just hull it fresh throughout the year. But people love the fact that we have that variety. Even with the wheat, to have a choice between 3 or 4 different wheats, both soft and hard. So I think you have to, the grain processing facility can be less complex or more complex. Less complex can be more like, $200,000-$300,000, and to process it on the level that we're doing it, more complex can be anywhere from up $500,000. When you start getting into like laser color sorters and that more high-tech equipment, that's where you get into the real cost. So ergot was the name of the disease that you want to test for. Thank you, Angie, for that. So in all of your grains, mainly, it can come up in wheat, and darn, they use a different name. But so anyway, but you test for it every year. You send out to the lab and make sure that you don't have it. And a lot of times, even if you do have it, you can get a lot of that bad grain out because it's a percentage of the grain that once you go over a certain percentage, then it's not good for people food. So you can reduce the percentage with the seed cleaning equipment when you're working with a gravity table. Or I was down in South Carolina, and there was a piece of equipment that a farmer bought because he had too much ergot in his grain, and he was able to just take it out with this rolling screen, and then it was good for the market. So there's all kinds of caveats to that, but for the most part, we try to grow grain and make sure that we don't have any issues. We've never actually had any issues with that where we even had to be concerned with it coming out of the fields. All right. Any other questions? Well, I hope this was helpful. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Mary Beth. And maybe we can do this in person next year. That would be great. I can't, you're out. We can't hear you.
Yeah.
All right.
No, you were just talking about how it wasn't a sustainable ag conference without y'all, and that we hope we can see you in person next year. So we really appreciate you being here.
All right. Thank you. Peace,
Thank you.
everyone. Okay.
Have a good night.
Yes.